Hi, everyone. This is Mike with another episode of Getting Everyone Moving, brought to you by Palms of Pines Parasports. Today, for episode 74, we're going to talk with the commissioner, Bruce Froendt of USA Wheelchair Softball. Hi, Bruce.
Good morning, Mike.
Good morning. So, Bruce, let's talk about how you got involved with adaptive sports and became commissioner of wheelchair softball.
Well, adaptive sports entered my life right after my injury in 1984. Having been fairly athletic before I was injured at the age of 24, I immediately tried to find an outlet for my competitiveness and athletic abilities and identified racing. And so I started wheelchair racing in 1987 and through a progression of various sports through that time, I identified softball in 1998 and started playing softball in 98. And so for the last 20 years, 20 plus years, I've been playing the game of softball. And for about the last 17, I've been commissioner or president of that association.
How did you get injured?
Dove into a swim pool when I was 24 years old. I thought the shallow end was the deep end. So one of those diving accidents you hear so much about, and I was one of those. So at a bright young age, just graduated from college, started my professional career in accounting, and found myself at the bottom of the shallow end of a pool one night, and changed my life forever.
Oh, man. How did you, obviously, there's a lot of difficulty, right, when you're first injured. How did you, kind of push yourself, and what kind of support system did you have to, keep you going and to have this fantastic life that you have?
Well, I've always kind of been a glass half full kind of guy, and I think that served me well when I found myself face down in that pool. Because again, immediately I couldn't move. And a lot of things went through my mind, and when I came back up, got some air, it was a new start because it could have ended right there. So I saw it that way, not an ending of things that my life that I had known before, but more of a beginning of one that I was going to have to make the best of, regardless of what I had or didn't have. Of course, my family, my mother, my brothers and sisters, my father, my friends, they were all very supportive of what I wanted to do, but it was really, really up to me what I wanted to make of my life from that point forward. And I decided to make the best of it. I also immediately in rehab saw some other people that didn't have it as fortunate as myself. Now I'm a C6 level injury. And of course, in Craig Hospital back in 1984, there were a variety of spinal cord and head injury patients. And there was a girl who was 15 and she was a C4 injury and couldn't move at all. And I developed a friendship with her, but immediately saw that regardless of the challenges I had, they were nothing compared to what that young lady faced. And so with that, I just carried forward and did the best that I could as often as I could. I wanted to be a para instead of a quad. I tried to do the things that paraplegics could do, wheelies and all those silly things, in rehab, and push myself. And I've tried to continue to carry that forward throughout my life, always challenge myself to do what I can and focus on what I can do, and I won't say disregard, but not focus and not get down on those things that are more challenging. Finding ways through them, whether it's with friends or people that can help do it, just finding a way to overcome and continue on meeting the goals that I have.
And so before we get into wheelchair softball, what kind of career have you had? What have you done?
Yeah, well, professionally, I graduated from the University of Nebraska just before my injury. So I was in the accounting profession, in IT, but in accounting. And after I got hurt, I figured out that maybe the best way to open more doors with the type of injury I have was to get more education. So I immediately, 9 months after my injury, enrolled in graduate school at the University of Texas at Austin, and got my master's degree there 2 years later. And so in 1987, I embarked on a corporate management career. Exxon hired me out of Austin. And so for 5 years, I worked for Exxon Corporation down in Houston. And that's when I found wheelchair racing. After those 5 years, I wanted to get back to where I grew up, which was Nebraska. I'm from a small town in Nebraska. So I just moved back. I quit Exxon and had a promising career, but just didn't care for the big city as much as I maybe would have hoped I had. So I moved back to Omaha, Nebraska, and wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I joined two individuals that just started a thing out of their garage, and we started a data processing company that worked with credit cards. And for the next 15 years, I worked that business, and we grew it to about 70 employees.
Wow.
Sold it to another corporation, and in 2008, I retired from business. And
Wow.
so it afforded me to do some things philanthropically
Yeah.
that I would prefer to do, volunteer extraordinaire, not get paid for any of the things that I do, which is just fine because I'm fortunate enough not to have to need that.
Yeah.
So in 2008, I started a foundation here in Omaha called All Play, and we built $1.5 million field for children with special needs, 2 baseball fields, and we have 30 teams and 450 kids in that now, each for 14 weeks a year. I did that. And I became commissioner of wheelchair softball back in 2007. So it afforded me and allowed me to spend my time on things that I wanted to do more than what I had to do. So I've been fortunate from that standpoint to work myself professionally out of a job, more or less, and given me the ability to focus on some fun stuff and hopefully some things that benefit other people and their families across the country and even across the world.
That is terrific. Wow, what an amazing story. So let's get into wheelchair softball. I mean, why did you choose wheelchair softball? I mean, when you think about wheelchair sports, you think about basketball, of course, but why wheelchair softball?
Well, growing up in a small town in Coors, Nebraska, I think the town was 600 people. The thing you focused on as a child, as a boy, was summer baseball. As soon as school got out and the summer got hot, 3 days a week, there was this special event called baseball practice. And as an 8-year-old, you'd ride your bike across the small town to the baseball field an hour early and wait for the coach to show up. And for that next hour and a half, it was just so amazing to play baseball. And so that was always in my blood. And I continued to play that through high school. I even played it not in college, but at more of a rec level. So I always loved the sport. And then I found myself in a position where I couldn't play it anymore, i.e. a wheelchair. And I honestly didn't even know that the sport really existed from 1984 when I got hurt until 1996 or 1997 when I moved back to Nebraska and found a team that had just kind of formed itself here in Omaha. But once I saw that, even though I was a quadriplegic, I found that I could find a way to play. And wheelchair softball requires that each team that plays have a quadriplegic on the team. So I kind of found my niche. I found something that I could do. That there's quad rugby, and I wasn't fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time to play quad rugby until later on. I started a team here in Omaha, but that was the first team sport that I really found that I could identify with, and also met a passion that I have, which was baseball. So I got myself involved in the team that was just getting going here in '98 called the Nebraska Barons. So softball kind of filled that love that I had for baseball.
And how is wheelchair softball growing then? I mean, I know we've had some conversations, so I know of a few teams out west, but talk about the development of wheelchair softball throughout the U.S.
founded in the Midwest back in about 1976. Now, there's chronicles of the game being played years before, more recreationally. It's been chronicled in Sports and Spokes that it may have went back into the 50s, or occasional games occurring at different places. But the official organization, National Wheelchair Softball Association, was founded kind of in Minnesota in 1976. And there was a base of teams in Minnesota, through the Midwest down to Chicago. And those teams would get together, 8 of them, 10 of them, however many they could get. Omaha was involved, once a year, and play this national championship. So the championships actually started in 76. I think they started playing maybe in 75 or 74. But from that time forward, those teams have been kind of the base of the organization. And from that base, then a growth occurred as players would move across the country for various reasons and want to continue to play. There's been an evolution of the sport, or a growth of the sport, and it primarily went east more than west. And that tends to kind of be where softball's played, more in the Midwest and east a little bit. But so wheelchair softball kind of follows the footprint of softball in general in the United States. So from that time in 1976, there were probably about 8 to 10 active teams, and there were teams coming on and off, because there are more players on a team in softball. In basketball, you're out there with 5. In softball, you got to have 10. So really, to have a team, you need 12 or 13. And that becomes a little bit more challenging, can be a little more costly. And the requirement, the space requirement for softball is a little bit different. Where basketball, you can find gyms pretty much all over the place. You just got to be able to use them. In softball, you need a 225 square foot footprint somewhere. It's not quite a football field, but it's 75 yards of field. And you need a parking lot, basically, unobstructed, not trees and, islands and drains and all the other challenges. But you need that kind of place to play the game. So that there's some challenges, but very easily met with a little determination. And the sport grew. So it grew through the Midwest and toward the East. Today, and it grew to a point where teams started actually building dedicated fields. So in 1996, down in Pasadena, Texas, they actually dedicated one of these parking lots, or they actually built one. It wasn't even a parking lot. They laid down the asphalt and called it a wheelchair softball field. And of course, the specifications and dimensions, similar to softball, 50-foot base paths. But they painted it on the asphalt, and it was a permanent fixture, and they put some fencing up, and it was a wheelchair softball field. And that was the first one. And from that, the second one, there was a few in New York that were put up, and then Chicago really put a nice one up in the early 2000s. But from that point, there are now approximately 26 documented official wheelchair softball fields in the United States. And once you get those particular fields in those cities, then there tends to be a permanency of the game in that city. It's not transitory. Build it and they will come kind of concept. So the sport has grown to the extent now where there are over 20 dedicated fields, 25 in the United States, and there are even now some in Japan as the sport has grown internationally. So with 20 some fields, we now have approximately 20 to 30 regularly active wheelchair softball teams playing each summer, and there's probably about another 10 or 15 that play recreationally and don't necessarily get overly competitive in their involvement, but still offer the sport to people in the community to enjoy and for people to experience. And then there's probably about 10, between 5 and 10 youth teams that we have encouraged the formation of that exist in the same cities as some of the adult teams. But there's actually 1 or 2 that don't. There's no adult team, and there's just a junior team, and there's a high school and junior high, and they form their team, and we encourage that as to try to develop a little feeder program into the adult, but give the high school kids an experience. And we find that probably over half of the athletes that play wheelchair softball don't play basketball, and maybe even 2/3, or rugby. So this is a team sport that's different than the, ultra competitive aspect that basketball can be and rugby. So it appeals to a little wider variety of people, and it includes women. So we include women in the same division as men. So we have women involved. We allow juniors to play in our division. It's all, with a class and point system, so it creates competitiveness amongst teams. But it includes, and we need to do that because of the 13 people on a team. But we allow these teams to include a lot of people, so there can be a very social aspect to the team, and then as competitive as they want to get.
Talk about some of the differences. Like, is the ball the same size? Do you have a certain number of points on the field at one time? I mean, do you classify like in basketball and in rugby? Um,
Yeah, yeah. Well, just like those sports, to create competitive equalness, or to create the ability for teams, groups to compete against each other on an equal basis. Yes, we follow basically the same point system they do in basketball.
okay.
And we also use the same point system and classification system they use in rugby. So we use those two classification systems to come up with, a point value for each player on the field, and then we design the number of points that can be on a team or on a field at one time. So just like basketball and rugby, and teams have to figure out how many, amputee type players can be on the field versus quadriplegics versus paraplegics versus um, multiple sclerosis or spina bifida or whatever. The mixture has to work out, and they have to be under that point level, just like basketball and rugby. So that creates ability to be, fairly competitive. Um, the other aspects of the game there, the ball that we use is 16 inches. So regular softball is used by girls sports in high school or college. They're 12 inches and they're harder. This ball is a 16-inch ball. It's bigger. We don't use gloves because you really couldn't effectively push your chair with a glove on your hand.
Yeah.
There is a glove used in the game by the first baseman and sometimes the pitcher. But beyond that, everybody else they do not use one because you have to really move your chair to go get the ball. So the ball is of a size that when it's hit at you directly and with speed, you can catch it and it does not hurt you, but it will still move with speed. So it's a ball that's been used as a 16-inch De Beers softball, and on our website you can see them. On the videos you can see them, and they've been used for a long time and very effectively used. So. But beyond that, the bats are the same. They're a little bit heavier. We use a heavier bat because the ball is heavier. Um, you use sport chairs so that you can move around on the field itself fairly well. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot of other equipment or special equipment. Not like rugby. There's not a special equipment required. The field would be the only other, little bit of a difference. You just need a place to practice, big parking lot or something like that, and that's where we play. We play in parking lots or on these dedicated fields that have been built around the country. So that's kind of the equipment, and we have on the website wheelchairsoftball.org. There is a video, a 3-minute video that shows all the equipment that we use. So if you're interested in understanding that, in 2 to 3 minutes, you can understand all the equipment that we use to play the game.
So I would think it would be really hard to hit a ball then. I mean, do people use one arm to hit it, or is it, the two?
Yeah. So you're asking, you looked at the video, so you got some questions
Yeah, I have.
set up there. Yeah, you do, Mike. Good job. Yeah. So in this particular game, individuals that are like amputees that have all of their upper body strength and skills and their back muscles and the ability to turn and bend, and they will use a two-handed swing technique because they can continue to accelerate the bat after they hit the ball and launch the ball effectively and with great strength and not lose bat speed. And so they'll use two hands, just like someone who's standing. They may twist in their chair. They may use their legs to rotate their body, and all sorts of little techniques to try to just get as much bat speed through the ball as they can. But paraplegics, for example, don't have that lower
Yeah.
body ability. They don't have the ability to open their hips and move their legs and start the bat swing. So if they try to use two hands, what essentially happens is their bat speed slows down as they try to hit the ball, and the ball does not launch. It just comes off at a slower speed and they can't hit it as far. So to compensate for that, they swing with one arm, their back arm, as they face the pitcher. And that allows them to initiate a bat speed and continue the bat speed through the contact of the ball with a follow through. So one-handed swings are very effective. Of course, they still can't be as effective as a two-handed swing.
Yeah.
But a one-handed swing allows athletes to generate bat speed and hit the ball as hard as possible. If I was, as a quadriplegic, tried to hit a ball with two hands,
Yeah.
with a bat, I would be able to hit that ball probably pretty effectively, but the strength of which I'd be able to do it and the ball propulsion after we hit it would just dribble to the pitcher or dribble to an infielder very ineffectively. If I go to one hand and I'm able to hang on and control the bat and hit that ball with velocity, I can actually hit it through the infield with some speed. So it does make a big difference. And based on your abilities or disabilities, you figure out what the most effective technique to use to hit the ball. So there is a difference just based on an athlete's injury and abilities.
I know that there's a discussion coming up actually with the collegiate division of wheelchair basketball to allow people without physical disability to play the game. I don't know how far that will get. There's been ongoing discussion. Do people without physical disability play wheelchair softball too, just so that you can have, you can really get teams forming and all that?
Certainly so. And actually, that's the approach so the game has been around in the United States for 40 years and well established. As teams begin, sometimes it's hard for them, just like you said, to get enough players to play.
Yeah.
In Japan, that was a significant immediate issue, and they immediately identified the ability for 2 or 3 able-bodied athletes to get in and be a part of a legitimate team.
Yeah.
And so that's how they started their teams. And then they were able to create awareness of their teams in the area, that other individuals with disabilities would say, hey, I want to play. And pretty soon they could start to phase those able-bodied individuals out of the game.
Okay.
The same can be done here. I mean, anybody can jump in a chair and help out at practices just like they do at basketball. The question is, when you start to play competitive games or tournament games or even national championships, to what extent do you allow an individual without a disability to be a part of that team? And if he's a part of that team throughout the year, but then has to not play, that team is significantly different, So how do you phase that in? Here, currently, we have a World Series that we hold each year where the teams that play throughout the summer come and compete for the championship in the United States, and actually in the world, because Japan comes too. In that event, all the individuals have to meet the requirements both of USQRA and of NWBA, and they have to have a disability, a mobility disability. So an able body wouldn't be allowed to play in those events. But throughout the summer, we have 15 or 20 tournaments held in the various cities around the country. And there are on occasions teams that don't have enough players on their team to play. So team players from other teams will help fill, or once in a while, someone who's able-bodied will jump in a chair to fill, and there's no harm, no foul. And that's allowed to happen just so everybody can play ball and have fun. So we'll see where it transpires long term. Again, there's lots of arguments both ways, but I won't necessarily go over those. But currently they can, at practice, they can in local tournaments, but as far as our championships and international championships, no, they have to have mobility impairment.
What about wheelchair softball as part of the Paralympics? It seems like it would, a very good sport to be part of Paralympics. What do you see as kind of the longer term opportunities to make that happen?
Yeah, it would be. It'd be a great sport for the Paralympics. just like baseball and softball are great sports for the Olympics. Now, they've had their challenge in the Olympics. They phased them out, phased them in. And boy, I was part of the Paralympics back in '88 in Seoul. And right after that, they initiated some actions to start to reduce the number of competitors that they would have at the Paralympic Games because of the cost of hosting the Paralympic Games. They started combining classes and functions and disability groups into one. Amputees and spinal cord were together. They did that and reduced the number of Paralympic athletes from the 5,000s to the three. They started doing all that. So the challenge, of course, at the Paralympics in softball would be the number of players that would come, the number of athletes for the sport. But outside of that particular argument, the bigger challenge is just the number of countries that play the game of wheelchair softball. Wheelchair basketball and wheelchair rugby enjoy a kind of a worldwide popularity, and the ability for those sports to occur because they occur on a basketball court, it's easier. In wheelchair softball, in baseball, it's not a worldwide sport necessarily, like it is popular here. So currently, there's only a few countries that are effectively or competitively playing wheelchair softball outside the United States. And for the Paralympics, you got to have at least 4 or 8 countries or more. You have to have kind of a qualification to get into the games. And then in the games themselves, you have to have a championship. So I don't know the long-term prospects. It'd be wonderful. And there are countries that are dabbling in and finding in Australia and Canada, Holland. There are several places where they're experimenting with the game. Japan, it took off, and there are 20 or 30 teams in Japan. Korea, it took off about 5 years ago, and there were multiple teams in Korea, in South Korea, of course, but they have reduced a little bit. There are a couple organizations down in Africa, one in Ghana and one in Nigeria, and so they are playing the game. But again, the challenges for the Paralympics would be enough countries that effectively host competitive sports for the Paralympics to hold them together to have a world championship.
Yeah, that it's amazing to me. Okay, Japan. Yeah, I mean, I understand the Western influence, but Ghana, Nigeria, for there to be teams there, that's incredible to me. That's amazing.
Yeah, there were simply an individual or two that they promote wheelchair sports in their country, and they get some funding from their consulates to do some adaptive sports. And so these individuals had a little bit of relations and were able to, maybe get a little resource. But the challenge here is indeed resources. I mean, the individual players themselves to get a chair that can effectively play. Secondly, equipment that can play the game. Third, to find a place. Now, down in Africa, they were actually using some of the facilities that were used for the World Cup. The World Cup was big down in some of the African countries, 8 years ago or 6 years ago. And there were these huge stadiums built and parking lots all over the place. Immediately after World Cup, those fell in. They became immediately dilapidated because there just wasn't the infrastructure to support them. And a softball team or two tried using those facilities, but they were just immediately not effectively used. So I've seen, they actually had a championship in Ghana where there were 4 or 5 teams that came to play, and they were playing on a surface no bigger than an outdoor basketball court, which is fairly ineffective for the game. They were still trying to play the game, but they just didn't have the resources. And we sent them bats and balls and some of the small things, but even wheelchairs were a challenge for most of the athletes to have. Just having a wheelchair, number one, much less a sport chair, so lots of hurdles, depending on the country and the resources, lots of hurdles in other places to play the game.
Yeah. We somewhat, forget about that in, developing countries. I mean, in the US, right, we have the Challenge Athletes Foundation, we have Kelly Brush, we have other organizations who provide grants so you can get your sports wheelchair. So, but it is, to me, I mean, I learned about wheelchair softball not that long ago when I heard that my friends in Tucson were forming a team. And I'm just, you know, it seems like such a natural. I mean, it's a great sport from what I've seen. And hopefully in Southern California, we'll get at least one team, if not two or three at some point. Um, so we're coming to the end of our interview, and what about some final words, you know, for our listening audience? Anything you'd like to say?
Well, particularly and specifically toward wheelchair softball, you know, it's a great sport for individuals who don't want an ultra high competitive, intense experience on a basketball court or a rugby court. Uh, and I call it a complementary sport. You know, those sports are played and practiced between August and about March or April.
Yeah.
And individuals that play those sports generally have practiced multiple times a week, and they're on courts, and they're really working hard. Unless you're willing to do that, meet that extreme kind of up tempo aerobic type activity, people phase away from that. And there are a lot of people that's just not for them. It's just too much.
Yeah.
Softball is the same way. Softball is more skill specific and not as intensely aerobic and intense. It can be recreationally very enjoyable. You can get out and hit and run and catch a ball and throw it and joke around and have fun. And as the individuals and groups you're with want to take it up to another level, that opportunity presents itself in our organization. Yeah. So like I said, there are teams that recreationally play, and they get together once a week and they play little scrimmages amongst themselves, and people jump in chairs and they have fun playing just a wonderfully social game. And then there are teams that do that and take it to the next step. And they say, hey, let's beat that team that beat us in basketball last year, or let's beat that team over there. Let's beat those. Let's get together and practice so maybe we can show them versus them always showing us in that other sport. And so they take it to that level. And that opportunity presents itself in wheelchair softball. So we have an ultra competitive side, and the top 6 or 8 teams in the country, we actually send a U.S. team over to Japan to see who the best team is in the world. That just like over there, they take their 20 or 30 teams and form their team Japan, and we form our team USA. So we have this ultra competitive aspect to our game, but it's also casually, wonderfully enjoyable by those that don't necessarily want to be that extreme. So there's a wide acceptance. And again, like I said, male, female, youth aged. I think some of our players are in their 60s and can still play the game. So we just offer a wide range of opportunity, or a wide range of individuals that have adaptive needs for sports. And softball is a great fit. So we invite everybody to come out and enjoy it. On our website at wheelchairsoftball.org, there is a variety of videos that show individuals how we play the game. There's the game itself. There's the field that we play on. There's how to pitch, how to run, how to hit, how to catch. And you can get a sense of how simple it is. And it really is simple. And then we encourage individuals to get out and try to form a team, and you can contact us and we'll assist you in the ways that we can to figure out how to just get something going and get people out and give them another opportunity to get out of the house and to get together and form friendships and experiences on a softball field. So I would encourage you, if that might be something you would enjoy, to pursue that. And again, we can assist you in any way that we possibly can through our website. You can contact us, and we'd love you to find and enjoy the sport that we all do, and it's part of our lifestyle. And we have 400 or 500 players throughout the country. It's part of their lifestyle and part of their family's lifestyle. We invite you to come and enjoy that with us. So please contact us, and we'd like to help you out, and we'd like to get some more teams going like we are in California, we hope.
Right. Well, Bruce, thank you so much. This has been incredibly informative. And yeah, I want to see more wheelchair softball happening throughout the U.S. and obviously throughout the world too at some point. Thank you.
Most certainly. Thank you for having me.